Hello guys. So it is well known that exercise is very much needed for our proper body functioning. And it looks as if that everybody kind of want to do exercise, but people does not see the need or the reason why you should do exercise. And today I'm going to talk about why exercise is needed in maintaining the brain and making it properly function. So to start with, I'm just going to go through a couple of basic fundamentals of the brain and how the brain works so you would understand the phenomenon of what exercise actually do in maintaining the brain. Now, the brain consists of small cells. As you can see here, these cells are called neurons, right? And mostly these cells are actually wired together and then they communicate between each other. So one cell here, like cell number one, cell number two here, you can see that they're kind of wired together and they establish a communication between each other. At the ends of this wiring, there is something that is called a synapse. And this is where information that is being received at one part of the cell is released to the adjacent cells and the information is communicated across the brain. Now, mostly the brain actually communicate with each other through electrical signals. And these electrical signals constitute the conduction of ions such as sodium, you have potassium, and calcium ions. So these ions is the fundamental ions that cause the communication or the electrical signals to be transmitted from one cell to the other. At the connection between these cells, these electrical signals stimulate the production of small molecules that are called neurotransmitters. So now these neurotransmitters are these small molecules that you can see here. Mostly the production of these neurotransmitters are sometimes initiated by protein synthesis, which causes the production of these small molecules. These small molecules are going to interact with some proteins that are on the surface of the adjacent cells. And once that interaction is actually established right here, where the small molecules are interacting with the proteins on the adjacent cells, they receive the information and they propagate the flow of the electrical signal or they initiate protein synthesis. Now, as we move further, you would understand why protein synthesis is actually needed in the brain functioning. So as previously said, when you zoom in, you can actually see here that one of the neurotransmitters or some of the chemicals that is being produced when information is being received by the brain through the conduction of electrical signals is glutamate. Now, this glutamate have the ability, or this neurotransmitters has the ability to cause the conduction of other ions in the adjacent cells. Also, these molecules can initiate the synthesis of proteins. So these pathways is actually showing you that the interaction of these electrical signals or small molecules that is being released is causing the synthesis of different forms of proteins. Now, in memory formation, this is what actually happens. When you receive new information and the brain has to actually solve this, store this information in the form of memory, the information comes to the cells in the form of electrical signals. The electrical signals is going to initiate the synthesis through complex pathways that I don't want to explain. Um, the synthesis of some proteins. Now, this, you can see here that the surface of this cell has about 1, 2, 3, 4 proteins. Now, upon receival of information, this protein is being, an addition of protein is added to this protein that is right here to make it about 5 or 6. So that means that the new information that was being released or received by the brain cells is used to synthesize proteins, or it can be used to remove proteins. In the removal of some of these proteins from the surface of the cells, then you actually lose memory. But when new proteins are synthesized, then you gain memory. So mostly, whatever information that we receive, the final product is the synthesis of proteins, which serve as the storage of information in your brain, mostly in the hippocampus. Now, what are some of the critical objects? So I'm going to call these objects because these are big names and associated with them. But then when you see these as mere objects that enable your brain to function, like mere food that your brain needs in order for proper functioning, then you can anticipate what is actually going on. So some of these food or chemicals or objects that is being needed by the brain for proper maintenance of the brain is BDNF, which is brain-derived neurotrophic factors. We have lactate, we have the SIRT1, the PGC1 alpha, FNDC5, mTOR, AMPK, and autophagy. Now, once you know all these factors, in the next slide, we're going to talk about how exercise lead to the production of these chemicals that maintain the brain. So first, when you exercise, some of you guys may know, or some of you may not know, but the basic knowledge here is that when you exercise, you stretch your muscles. Now your muscles need more energy because you turn up breaking down the glucose in your muscles, right? So now you have a lot of glucose in your muscles. The glucose is converted to a chemical known as pyruvate, right? So now this pyruvate, because you are exercising at a very faster pace, the pyruvate is converted to what we call lactate. And there is a lactate buildup in your muscles than the cell can actually contain. Now, when this lactate is actually built up in your muscles, it is good and essential for proper brain functioning. And this steps is going to show you how lactate that is built up in the course of exercise actually promotes and maintain the brain. So lactate here has the ability to go through, go and bind to some receptors or proteins on the surface of the cell. When the lactates bind to these receptors, they have the ability to enter the cells. That is, this receptor mediate the translocation, that is the movement of this lactate into the cell. In the cell, what it does is that they bind to some of these chemicals or objects that are needed for brain functioning. And one of them is what we call the SIRT1 that I mentioned in my previous slide. The SIRT1 goes through a cascade of initiating other brain promoting chemicals that such as the PGC1 alpha, the FNDC or the ergozine. Now, the major component that is being synthesized from the lactate is what we call the brain-derived neurotrophic factor, that is the BDNF, right? And this BDNF actually promotes learning and memory. So in the course of your exercise, you've been able to generate a chemical called lactate. And this lactate has helped you to produce what we call the BDNF, which is the brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And this is what is promoting learning. So this actually is helping you to learn, right? Now, how does this BDN alpha promotes learning? So BDN alpha promotes learning through a simple phenomenon by actually activating a protein which is known as mTOR. And mTOR modulates most of the activities that is occurring in the cells. They even moderate growth factors, that is something that promotes your actual growth. They initiate cell growth as well and promote proper body functioning. So when this BDNF that is generated as a result of the buildup of the lactate through your exercises gets into the cells of the neurons, it causes that causes the production, the activation of mTOR. Now, when the mTOR becomes active, they initiate protein synthesis. They can cause something that is called autophagy. And autophagy is actually getting rid of cells that are not useful. You just get rid of them, right? So this is the connection that tells you how relevant or important exercise is and how it can help you to actually synthesize new proteins. Now, previously, you know that the synthesis of proteins is what is actually memory, because the information is actually stored in the proteins that is being synthesized on the synapses or the surface of the neurons or the brain cells. So when mTOR is activated, now you have the ability to synthesize these proteins that gives you the ability to store information. Now, lastly, how does exercise promote your mental health and proper function of the brain and prevent you from getting diseases such as Parkinson and Alzheimer's? Mostly Parkinson is caused by degeneration of neurons of some nucleus in your brain. It is a very big word. It's called the substantia nigra compacta. This actually constitute how it actually facilitates how information is transmitted to your brain in order for you to make decisions. Now, when you have Parkinson, the initiation of these decisions is being limited or reduced because the neurons in these cells that could cause the initiation of a decision is actually depreciated. And this comes as a result of reduction in protein synthesis. So as you can see here, this is an actual proper functioning of the brain. With time, as you keep on growing, some of these brain cells degenerate or die off. And it gets to this part where most of the brain cells actually die off. And now it becomes hard for you to make an initial decision through your voluntary movement or something else. Another disease that is associated with brain is what we call Alzheimer's. And Alzheimer's actually causes what we call synaptic plasticity. That is the prevention of synthesis of proteins on the surface of the brain cells. So the protein synthesis that exercise can promote is being prevented, and this leads to Alzheimer's. So this is why, as an individual, it is extremely important to actually undertake exercises to initiate decisions through voluntary movement or maintain your brain in order for you to store adequate information and retrieve it as well. So this is the scientific basis or the evidence that establishes the need for exercises in maintaining the brain function. I hope this video is very informative to you and gives you the reasons why you should exercise every day. Thank you.